All right, welcome to Modern Day Apocrypha. I'm Nick,
I'm Tony, and this is that.
and that's us. Today we're talking about privatized prisons. I think it's been kind of a hot topic over the past couple years. Maybe I'm just more aware of it, and it's always been a hot topic. But I think lately, with a lot of legal scrutiny going on, it's just really been at the forefront of a lot of conversations.
Yeah, I'm definitely very interested in this and kind of seeing what we discover and where we go with this topic.
Yeah, and so we always start out by at least doing some surface level research so that we can understand a little bit more about the topic here. And going into this, I felt like it was initially going to be just a really fucked up situation. And I think that I still believe that. But
Yeah.
I'm curious to see if there are any reasons to actually operate the way that we are operating, or is this entire system, the way that it's structured, just set up for, I don't know, I was going to say success, and maybe it's like success in the government's eyes, but, it's just, when you look at the numbers, it's an abysmal system.
Right. Well, if you look at how it got started, right? And I think the intent of it getting started was the governments were, state and federal. We can't handle all this on our own. And so just like they did in other, let me pull it back up here. So for other different private firms for like medical services, I'm pulling this off Wikipedia right now, like food prep, vocational training, inmate transportation, like there's a long history of us contracting that out from governments to privatize stuff. That makes sense.
Well, I mean, we do it with your water and your trash and construction.
It makes sense. But in the 1980s, when the war on drugs and stuff started, well, now we have all this huge influx of people being put into prisons, so we don't have the infrastructure set for it. Privatization came in a big way.
Yeah, and so now, so what you're saying is that instead of just contracting out aspects of the justice system, like inmate transportation, or obviously you've got to have, somebody running food for a prison.
Yep.
That might be a private company. But now we're talking, it's very common to see an entire prison in and of itself being privatized, so that the underlying problem here is that these private prisons are making profits per number of inmates that they incarcerate.
Right.
And so, just like you can jump to the conclusion very quickly that if you're running a business and your business's job is to make profits, you now have an incentive to incarcerate people and make sure that all of your cells are filled.
Yeah, which is crazy because, at least in my mindset, the goal should never be to have full prisons. Even if it's an unrealistic goal that can never happen, that the prisons are empty, we should still consistently reach for it. Because that means, hey, people who broke the rules that we've all agreed on in society, the goal is not to just, oh, you fucked up, you're out of society. It's no, let's teach you how these rules work. And especially for nonviolent things, there's less of a risk to others. Hey, let's teach you how to come back as part of this, group of people and culture and society, instead of just, you're fucked.
Right. Yeah. It shouldn't just end your life. And I don't mean literally kill you, although that obviously does happen.
Right.
But I mean, the challenges that somebody faces if they've been imprisoned, it's going to be harder to find a job. They've probably missed out on years of their life, which could be appropriate, but you also have to think about what does it look like to get them
Rehabilitated?
rehabilitated. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say, but I'm not sure that's the right word.
Reestablished?
But yeah, reestablished, I think, is a better way to phrase that.
Sure.
In society, where they can actually go back and contribute. Because otherwise, if they can't come out of jail, find a new job, then they're probably going to feel like, well, there's not much to lose. And the likelihood of falling back into whatever circle they might have been involved in that got them in prison in the first place is going to be high.
Right. Because it creates that desperate people do desperate things. And so when we systematically create desperation in people so they continue to do desperate things, we are not serving ourselves. We're not serving these people. We're just making money off of them, which is really dark.
Yeah. I listened to one interview from an inmate who was part of one privatized prison system. And, he talks about his story. He was involved in an armed robbery, and it ended up even being like a shootout. So it was like attempted murder and this whole thing. The guy, obviously it's a short documentary, so he's claiming that he's pretty well reformed, and he does seem that way. Like now he's fighting to kind of reveal what's going on in private prison systems. And he got so involved in this. I don't know how long he served, but after his prison sentence, he got so involved in just kind of like shedding light on this that he ended up buying stock into one of these private prison companies so that he could attend the shareholder meetings.
Wow.
And he can like ask the difficult questions. And so that's kind of interesting. It's like he can speak from it as an inmate, but now they also have to respect him as a shareholder, and he has every right to attend just like anybody else.
That's fucking powerful. I love that.
Yeah,
I did not
bold.
expect that to go that way when you're like, and now he has stock. And I was like, oh shit, that's dark. But
yeah, so he bought stock for, like a not common reason. Like he's not trying to like profit off of it too.
Yeah.
Maybe he is. Maybe he's got a conflict of interest, but he has different recordings of like asking the CEO, like, what's going on with this situation and this situation and this situation. And they're trying to like sweep things under the rug, and it's just not pretty.
Yeah. And so I think I agree with the version of correction if people fuck up, right? Because that's healthy. That's feedback. Hey, you messed up. Here's how we're doing better. And if that needs to be you fucked up so bad, well, let's take away all your rights. Let's pull you out of society and really break down and go, hey, here's what you did wrong and here's what we're going to do better. But I feel like we only do the first part of that, where we remove people from society and go, hey, you're going to serve your time. But what does that do? You know what I mean? Like, sure, you've got to sit there for 6 months, 7 years, however long you're sentenced for, to think about what you've done. And it just sounds like an adult version of timeout. Like, come on, this is 2020. We have very highly intelligent people who know how to solve very complex things. You don't think we can do better behavioral adaptation and like healing people better than just the timeout? Like, that's all we got?
Yeah, so I think the other side of that argument, though, is that prisons, I don't know if this is all prisons or just some, but they do offer, like, you can go and finish your GED, or you can be involved in like different religions and like get something out of that. And I hear different stories about how people have been able to turn their life around. They have access to books. I've just from listening to some of the people talk from the Innocence Project, I've heard of some of their inmates who will go and study law from their prison. Like they just get as many books. And I guess if you're, in solitary confinement and you have 1 hour outside of your cell every day, well, you might as well spend a good 16 hours reading some books and stuff and learning how to defend yourself if you're truly innocent, like you're going to try to be exonerated. And so they do have access to that. And I think that there's something to be said there, that there is an opportunity. But maybe the downside is that the onus is entirely on the inmate themselves, right, and they may not be encouraged to move down that path.
So think of it like an adult toddler, right? And I'm not saying, to clarify before I continue, I'm not saying that everyone in prison's a toddler, but you have a toddler and they fuck up and you go, hey, time out. Let's remove you from the situation. Let's change your state. Let's have you think, oh, why am I here? What's going on? And then cool, let's bring you back after a few minutes and let's talk about it and help you understand why you did what you did and how that wasn't helpful for you or the people around you. And now let's go back, right? And I know that's different between stealing a kid's toy and trying to kill somebody. We're on different scales here, but I feel like the approach and the intention should be the same. And I feel like we just put them there and, well, if you figure out how to be better, all on your own while you're in timeout, great. But I don't see, or I haven't experienced, and it might just be my ignorance, the educated, elevated, enlightened, however you want to call it, person coming and going, all right, now that we kicked your ass out over here, how are we going to get back and how are we going to do better?
Yeah, and have like an actual plan. And, maybe a lot of that comes back to the fact that the prisons have so many inmates. Like if you've got 2,000 people that you're trying to keep track of their lives,
It's a lot of work.
it's like, yeah. And you got to pay somebody who's going to fill that role. At that rate, you probably have to pay multiple people.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're going to have to be pretty well qualified people too. So the service is probably going to be expensive. And so I think that's kind of where a lot of the question might lie is, how do you fund something like that? How do you ensure that you can rehabilitate your prisoners? And then at its core, I think almost everything comes down to economics. Like,
Yeah.
you have to look at the cost benefit of, well, how much damage does it do for us to release inmates after their sentence and just tap them on the ass and say, off you go? And then they come back into the prison system, which costs money, or they hurt somebody, or, just damage society. That obviously has its own economic impacts.
Yeah.
Versus how much of that can you offset by just sending the funding up front to rehabilitate people and make sure that they're better suited for transitioning back into life.
Yeah. And I think with change, everything takes time, right? And so I don't know what that arc or curve looks like before you'd start to see those numbers move. But, you'd also have to think about the long-term effects of, well, then if we don't have to spend so much money on a police force because there's not so much shit that they're having to quell, and it's expansive. And then, cool, well, how much money could be generated by these people who are actually put back into society? How many inventions have we lost out on as society? How many breakthroughs in XYZ because those people were held away from society from us because they fucked up once?
Yeah.
And for me, like, I've fucked up a lot, but I mean, luckily I've never had to go to jail. There's things I've done that I probably should have or would have qualified to go to jail for. But luckily for me, no one was there to, to learn my lesson. Right. So it's just interesting that now I'm out here free, able to give back and do my part to hopefully elevate society and create a better world. But other people aren't because their circumstances just happen to be different.
Right. Yeah. I know that we've referenced this on one of the previous episodes, but it takes me back to that kid who was, I don't remember how old he was. He was a teenager, maybe an adult teenager, but I think he was in New York, and he got caught with like a small amount of cocaine.
Yeah.
And he was sentenced to a substantial
I think
sentence.
you said it was like 18 or 20 years, something crazy.
It was like
that.
18 to life or something like that. Regardless, if it's even 5 years, that's way too much for having like a personal sized amount of cocaine, and like wasn't involved in a crime or anything other than possession.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, if you're 17, that's going to fuck up your life. Imagine getting out of prison and let's say you went to jail for 20 years and now you're 37 having to start over.
Well, and think about the core of that. What we're teaching ourselves as a society is that we're punishing curiosity, right? And so you think 17-year-olds are just starting to get into their skin and starting to feel their independence and their freedom. Well, let me try this and let me try that. And some people will explore food, and some people will explore the world, and some people go, oh, what are these altered states? And sometimes that can lead down a bad addictive rabbit hole, and that's something else. But literally at that age, you're exploring. You're trying to figure out what the world is and what it means and where you fit in that place. And I think it's terrifying to me that we're punishing curiosity.
Yeah, it is.
At least as hard as we are too.
Just from that standpoint, the play on curiosity, I agree with. I think it's a shame. So that's kind of a general layout of where where people stand and why people get imprisoned. And we'll probably come back to this and scrutinize in a little bit more detail. But I've got one question because I think this plays like a different story that might shed some light on if there's any good in privatized prisons.
Let's do it.
So when I look at some of the numbers of incarceration rates around the world, I'll just cite 3 examples here. 2.2 million in the United States. And I want to caveat this by saying that I came across a lot of different numbers. So first and foremost, just let that be known. You'll probably find some different numbers. Seems like the average citation is around 2.2 million. And you can go to the Bureau of Justice Statistics and get the quote unquote official numbers.
Right.
So 2.2 million in the United States, 1.7 million in China, who is the number 2 highest imprisonment rate in the world.
And so
US is number 1.
You're giving these actual numbers. Is there percentages that go with these two?
Yeah. So, well, I don't have percentages, but most of the numbers, the way that they framed up their percentages so that you could get an idea of what the overall impact was, looks at the number of inmates per 100,000 citizens.
Got it.
So this was 770 in the United States. Again, I saw different numbers, 660 to 770, I think were the ranges. So let's call it 700 people per 100,000, just as a ballpark. But yeah, when you think about China, I don't remember the per 100,000 there.
Sure.
But when you think about 1.7 million inmates out of 1.3 or 1.4 billion people in China, they've got like 4 times the population that the United States does. But still,
they still have less people in their prisons than we do.
Significantly less. And just to kind of give you an idea of what the rest of the ranges are, we're talking number 1, US, 2.2 million. Number 2, 1.7 million in China. Getting to number 5 on the list, the number 5 heaviest incarceration rate in the world is India at 400,000.
Wow.
So like it just drops off dramatically. Russia was pretty high on the list. But you can see that we're well ahead of the average and the norm throughout the world, even when adjusted for population. But here's where I want to take this, because it sheds a little bit of light on what might be good about this.
Okay.
Not necessarily that many people are imprisoned, but the privatized prison system in and of itself means that we're able to at least offset some of the overpopulation. So if you think about like Kenya, I saw some numbers that said that they were like 238% to capacity or over capacity. And if you think about what that does to a prison system, like you're obviously going to have more riots, you're going to have rougher times getting those people reinstated in society. We already talked about how the state, or if it's a federal prison, the federal government has to pay guards and psychiatrists and food workers to accommodate for all of that.
Medical staff.
Exactly. And so it's a real problem if you have overpopulated prisons. And so this at least helps offset some of that.
So you're saying that here having so many people in the U.S. means our stuff isn't overpopulated? I'm not sure I follow.
Yeah. Okay. Good question. So having so many people in prison, I think, is a bad thing.
Okay.
But without the private prison system, the federal government would have to either build more prisons, which they obviously just weren't doing because they went out and sought contracts for private prisons, or they would have to put more of those prisoners in closer proximity, and it would be an overpopulated situation.
Got it. So it's not great that we have so many people locked up, but the fact that at least a silver lining of having this privatized aspect that we've had for the last 40 years at the big resurgence of it is potentially good, because at least these people are not all on top of each other and in over proximity.
Right.
Got it. And I follow that. I agree with that.
Can we even take that any further? I could not find any more value out of the privatized prison system beyond that. Like, that's honestly where it stopped for me.
I mean, I'm glad you found some. Because I'm over here going, yeah, fuck this. And what? What? Fuck that too. What? So, hey, at least you found some light in here, some goodness.
I mean, I'm trying, man. I'm honestly trying.
I mean, we try to bring a balanced approach and not just have our, torches and pitchforks on shit we don't like. So, no, it's good.
Yeah. So, but then you get into the real fuckery of it, which we've already stated is you're incentivized to imprison people. And that just can't be healthy. That sounds like a conflict of interest here. So maybe there's value in private prisons, but the payment model should be different.
I agree. And I think if there was a way we could incentivize prisons for people rehabilitated instead of people off the state or off the street, I think that is a really cool thing to solve for.
I think so too. I think that would be a really unique take on this, and maybe not so unique because I know that some of the Scandinavian prison systems do that. Maybe not from the sense that they like that's how they monetize it or incentivize it, but they focus a lot on that rehabilitation. And if you look at some of the cells, it's like they've got some bunk beds, they've got like a little desk. I think they had like computers in their prison cells so that they can access the internet and run their drug empires from prison.
But at the core of that, right? And there's stuff right and wrong, but I feel like the intention there is, hey, you're still a human.
Yeah.
Not, oh, nope, we're taking you to the human dog shelter where you have a shitty blanket and there's 6 people in this room where in normal stuff like health codes and stuff, people would get fined and not allowed to live that way. But yet we do that to people in prison. So why do we have a double standard for what being a human is like?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like just because you got caught doing X
Right.
doesn't mean that you aren't a deserving human being.
Right.
It could be one offense. It might not even been some grandiose issue or impact on society. Maybe it was nonviolent.
Or even let's take it to the extreme, right? Because I've had this conversation with several people offline, and they're like, "Are you kidding me?" So some of these people, like really fucked up people, like rapists and pedophiles and murderers and serial killers, yeah, I think they should be treated as human too, with boundaries, right? Hey, you know what? You did some crazy shit, and we're not going to let you back out into society, and maybe you really, really have to prove it. And I don't know what that system looks like to make sure that they prove it, because a lot of times these people are predators, and predators by nature are highly intelligent beings. So how do you put a system that can actually prove that their perspective has changed and that their personhood has changed and that they're not just checking boxes to be back out in the wild and being a predator again? I don't know what that looks like, but I think that's something we should reach for, because I'm a human, you're a human. We all have that in common. What we do with it is different. And I think to do our species justice, we have to give every human the opportunity to be a human instead of stripping it from them when they act unhumanly.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I guess that's where the conversation about parole comes in.
Sure.
So like if you're eligible for parole, then they look at what your record has been in prison, and that's where you try to be eligible. I'd be curious to see if there are any data points about like how many people who were released on parole go back to prison especially for committing the exact same crime that they were convicted of.
Yeah. Well, and I think this can open up into the conversation where we punish people, right? We brand people. Every application, have you committed a felony? Mm-hmm. And I understand there's a purpose for that of, you know what, if, you've committed corporate fraud, I probably shouldn't hire you as an accountant. Right?
Yep. It's all about determining if you're qualified.
At least be aware that if I do hire you as an accountant, because you know what, corporate fraud just means you probably are really smart and you just applied your skill set in a way that wasn't healthy for society. you know what, maybe I do want a really smart accountant, but I just need to be aware so I make sure that someone double checks their work.
Kind of like the hackers that get hired by the CIA
Yeah.
to go and like test their systems and be like, can you hack our shit?
Exactly. So instead of, you know, and of course employers never say they do this, but people look and go, oh, felon, sorry, nope.
Yeah, and so I think that there is validity in doing it. I shouldn't say that. I understand why
Right.
you want to do that as somebody who's hiring. But the other side of it is, like, if somebody served a 20-year sentence, I'm a much different person than the person that I was 7 years ago.
Right.
You know, when I was 20, I wasn't just doing a whole bunch of stupid shit all the time, but like I've grown a lot, come a long way since then.
Yeah.
And that's just 7 years. And that's not even forcing me to be in this space where all I'm thinking about is how I can better myself. Like, that's just over time, and I'm enjoying life. And so I can't imagine that a large number of inmates would change and evolve who they are over 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. And so does it serve them justice to always carry this brand around with them? Check mark, I have been convicted of a felony.
Right. And yeah, I don't know. And again, these are really like good questions, but they're complicated questions because there's not an easy answer of like, oh no, let's just take off the brand. We're good. Because that brand, that felon stamp, serves a purpose in some instances, but in others, I don't think it does.
So maybe there's an opportunity for you to be like an accredited inmate or something.
I love the sound of that.
And so it's like, now we're not asking, have you ever been convicted of a felony? It's, let's just say that it's like, you know, an inmate school or something.
Yeah.
I'm obviously making this up for conversation purposes, but if you graduate from inmate school, then you've gone through a certified outcome of involving different steps that you took to demonstrate that you're gaining skills, that you're growing as a person. And then that gives an employer an opportunity to ask, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Yes or no, or maybe you don't even ask that, but it's like, have you ever been accredited as an inmate?
Yeah.
And so you can check that, and it's like, hey, here's proof that I'm not the person that I was.
Yeah, conceptually, I think that's fucking fantastic because not only does it give the individual a path and an opportunity to go, nope, I'm at rock bottom. I never wanted to be here. I never want to come back. But the story you hear from so many people is, well, I don't know what else to do. And so I decided I was going to change, and then I get out and I had no skill set, and then I tried to go get work and nobody would hire me and nobody would trust me, or the jobs I could get paid so little that I couldn't even feed myself or my family. So I had to go do other desperate things to just try to make ends meet, not because I'm greedy and trying to build an empire, because, you know, I'm sure every crook isn't what we see in Hollywood. People are just trying to survive, right? And so if we give them the tools and a path on how to survive better, I think a lot of this stuff would have an opportunity to resolve itself.
I think so too. Absolutely. So I think that that stigma that you carry around with you is probably deserving, but also does not do a net good for society to force people to carry that around with them.
Yeah. Well, think about it this way. This probably isn't a fair comparison, but I'm going to do it anyway just because I think it'll help the thought exercise. When a kid fucks up, you don't make them, hey, you remember that time that you fucked up? That's who you are for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward 10, 20 years, they've had that repeated ingraining of this is who you are, this is who you are, this is who you are, this is all you're capable of. Boom, now you own that, and that's who you become. So when we're telling these people, you're a felon, this is all you'll ever be, this is No, let's move on. Let's heal that and move on. But we haven't gotten there yet. And some people figure out how to do that and how to embrace, hey, cool, I've overcome some really hard shit. Let's celebrate that. That's awesome. But I think that's the exception versus the norm.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's unfortunate. So, Tony, earlier you mentioned that this privatized prison system really boomed and escalated in the 80s.
Yeah.
And that's the same as the information that I had come across too. It was like leading into the war on drugs, going into the 80s, this privatized prison system really became an important part of the justice system. But what I found was interesting because I did some research on like has the crime rate dropped? What does it look like in general? And I'll be honest, this was another one where I found some contradictory information. So it's hard to claim what is factually accurate.
Right.
All of these different sources had sources that they cited, such as the Bureau of Justice Statistics. So that's where some of this comes from. But I found it interesting that we see property crime rates start to drop off in the 80s. And that includes things like burglary, motor vehicle theft, larceny is one of the charts here. We also see violent crimes.
What's larceny, by the way?
That's a great question.
Because my mind went to, oh, they're burning stuff. Wait, no, that's arson.
Arson. Theft of personal property is larceny.
Okay, perfect. All right, carry on with what you were talking about with the data.
Yeah, I wonder why they call that larceny instead of theft. Maybe it's just we got multiple words.
I feel like it's probably the legal version of medical terms where they use the Latin or whatever. Like, we got to use the it's larceny.
Could be. So, and then you also see some numbers here. These are some violent crime rates starting in 1990. So this is, 5 to 10 years after the exact time period that we're talking about. But it looks like it peaks around 91, 92, and then it falls sharply. The numbers that we're looking at here are, 750 reported violent crime incidents per 100,000 citizens. And so we're talking 750, and that drops down to below 400 in around 2010. And
so in like 20 years, it cuts in half.
Yeah. And so it feels like maybe that's some good. Like we're seeing lower rates, and maybe that's because we're trying to, have these crimes punished and you're more likely to go to jail. The prison populations are starting to climb as a result.
But what about, isn't that time when the economy was pretty damn good?
In the 80s, I think that they actually had some...
Well, going from where you said from the 90s to that 2010, where we had like our 2008 crash, wasn't that a time of like really good economy?
It was. You had the dot-com bubble in the early 2000s, and that crashed a little bit, but nothing to the extent of 2008 or what we've recently experienced with the pandemic.
Right. So if society, at least in the U.S., was more prosperous and more economically stable, people were forced to be in desperate situations less. That could also be a factor on why things went down.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so you're not having to sell drugs to make ends meet.
Right.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So on that note, what I thought was interesting is when you look at the narcotic arrests.
Hey.
We're talking in 2006, 1.9 million people got arrested for narcotics. And so if you look at the numbers here, we're talking right at 1980. We'll call that, it's about halfway between 400,000 and 800,000. So we'll just split the difference and call it, 550, 600,000 arrests. And that number just climbs tremendously all the way up until 2006, where it seems to have peaked at 1.9 million arrests in 1 year. And these are just arrests made on narcotics. So that would be selling, maybe manufacturing is included in that, possession. And so, if we as a society agree that narcotics are bad and that they're detrimental to society, then maybe that's a good thing. But I think we have to ask ourselves, is it better to let people have the freedom and choice to possess certain substances, maybe all substances, maybe it's limited to a certain number of things that we feel more comfortable with? I think that conversation remains up in the air.
Sure.
But maybe it's better to allow some leniency there and cut the costs and the social impact on these massive incarceration rates.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you've got something like marijuana, that it's not hard to see that marijuana is healthier. It doesn't, there's lots of people who can function pretty easily, and it doesn't, that's not a fair thing to say. Let me backtrack that a little bit. Physically, it's typically healthier for you than alcohol, but alcohol is legal. Sure, there's some boundaries around it, like, hey, it's not legal for you to have it until a certain age. You can't drive while under the influence. Well, shit, but it's literally like fucks with your liver and all this shit but that's legal. Or cigarettes, right? Like we can smoke our lungs to death and get the little bit of a buzz or escape that we need to balance from our fast-paced, stressful lives. But some of these other things are, nope, you tried to balance your life and balance the stress in your life, and now you're removed from society. That seems so insane to me. And then, nope, we're really going to lean into this, and 2 million people in this year, almost like 2006 that you're referencing. Nope, these people can't be in society. Fuck them.
Yeah. And for how many years too? Like,
right? You chose the wrong thing. You should have drank. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, when you frame it that way, like, you should have used alcohol.
Right?
I mean, obviously there's a better solution than alcohol.
Of course, but
to escape that, but
it's just interesting that those are the lines we've put as a society. And I think there's a lot of people kind of coming to that same conclusion, because the joke I've heard about the 2020 election was that marijuana won the 2020 election with, like, I don't know, an extra 6 states or something like that. And then a couple of states or cities like decriminalizing like mushrooms, and people are going, hey, yeah, this is bullshit.
Yeah. I think if anybody takes mushrooms, you'll feel like it's bullshit.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. It's just an interesting dynamic, because the trade-off here to me doesn't make sense.
Right.
It's one, I disagree with the government infringing on what I think is something that a free person should have the opportunity to make a decision like this for themselves. I haven't looked into like the really hard stuff, like meth, if you will.
Heroin, stuff like that. Yeah, I've not either.
I've watched a lot of Intervention, and people who are high on heroin seem to just fall asleep, and that's a shame. I hate seeing that people can really ruin their life over that, but I also believe that it's your personal choice,
right?
And that we should offer help first and not imprisonment for something like that. The other, like when I think about meth, I think back to like the DARE program that we all went through when we were in middle school and stuff. And you hear all these stories of like somebody got high on meth and went out and like shotgunned somebody down in the streets and stuff. And it's like, holy shit, maybe that happened. Like, I'm not denying that, but I mean,
and how stable was this person pre-meth?
Yeah, and my question, well, first of all, I feel like if you're doing meth, you're probably not entirely stable. I'm sure there are some exceptions there, but
sure,
maybe I'm just passing too much judgment that's undeserving.
Walter White seemed pretty stable.
Yeah, that shit down. But in light of what I've learned about marijuana, it's not something that makes you crazed. Think back to the stories that you heard with the origination of marijuana, not the origination, but when we were first trying to make it illegal, they were, talking about black men raping women all the time because they smoked marijuana. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, that's just not the case. That was propaganda.
Yep.
And so once you see through that, it raises an eyebrow about meth. I've never done meth before, but I'm like, okay, maybe that's some bullshit too. Maybe you're cleaning your house.
Right. Well, and just to balance that conversation, like I'm not sitting here advocating, we're not sitting here advocating like, go do drugs, everybody. It's just we're talking more about let's try to balance how everyone is treated in the world, and for some of these things that just seem like they might be having a more extreme version of punishment for something that doesn't necessarily warrant it.
Yeah, right. And yeah, so I think it all comes back to like the balance.
Yeah.
Is what we're doing and the expense that we incur to imprison people better than the crimes that people are committing?
Yeah.
My hunch is no.
I would probably hunch with you, but
I also pulled some numbers on how much we're spending. So again, I'm going to go back to the Bureau of Justice Statistics. They cite $81 billion a year in prison expenses. That's a fuck ton.
that's a couple dollars.
Yeah, $81 billion. And so to put that into perspective, the U.S. defense budget, if I recall correctly, is like $800 billion, and we've got 10 times the amount of expenses, or excuse me, our defense budget is as much as the next 10 countries combined.
Yeah.
And so that $800 billion mark is a shit ton. $80 billion for the justice system is a shit ton.
Yeah.
All just to keep people locked up, which we see about 2 million people each year, going back to 2006 again. So, quite a few years old still, but it's still in the millions, are just arrested for narcotics.
Yeah, not including anything else.
Right. Now, I did see that the actual number is expected to be much, much higher, around, I think it was like $182 billion is what the actual number is expected to be. And the reason that's cited is because the Bureau of Justice is really just accounting for what it costs to run the prisons itself at 81 billion. That doesn't include the court costs, the healthcare. Whenever you arrest somebody, there's going to be an investigation. You've got to pay a district attorney, maybe multiple, because you have so many court cases to begin with. And
The
all
cost
those
of
judges.
the police force and all of that too. Like you mentioned the investigation, so like just painting bigger picture there. Damn.
That's right. So 182 billion. And so that's a shit ton of money that is coming from taxpayers
Yeah.
to keep these a lot of non-violent crimes locked away.
Well, and then think about not just to the individual, right? So imagine somebody who has a family member who gets locked up for narcotics, and they're paying taxes to keep their family member locked up. Oof.
Yeah. That doesn't feel right.
No.
So ultimately, like, the law is the law. And so I don't think that we can really have a sound conversation about what should be legal and what shouldn't. And I know that we have, and I think that it's appropriate, but it's a little bit of a different conversation than the privatization of the prison systems. And so it feels like if you go back to the expenses that we're paying these private companies to ensure that they're meeting their quotas, because I also learned that they assign quotas in the contracts to say that you have to have a certain number of cells filled. Otherwise, you pay additional penalties.
That doesn't sound right at all.
And so that's just some real fuckery. And so I think that's the ultimate conclusion that I kind of come to on this is the payment structure, I think, is the core of the issue.
Well, yeah, because now it's just sales, right? I'm trying to hit my sales numbers. I'm trying to push people who don't need my product into getting it. Like, all right, people who don't need to be in prison, let me either entrap you or something that would be, hey, come on, man, this is a warning. Stop down this path. Because that's really honest and probably, first time. Nope, we're locking you up for 20 years because now we have a 20-year bed filled. Next. Like, oh,
it doesn't feel good.
Yeah, like when you look at that incentivization structure, safety should be the goal, right? Keeping society safe and balanced and healthy. And I think maybe at some point that's where it started and that was the intention. But just like anything, after it starts, it grows and evolves. And it grew and evolved, and someone probably saw an opportunity and said, hey, well, with this contract, whatever, and then maybe, this is all hypothetical, maybe someone on the privatized end had a prison, just wasn't working very hard and wasn't like taking a lot of people in. And so from the government standpoint, we were wasting money. And so they said, you know what? Nope, you're not fucking us anymore. Here's a quota. Oh shit. Well, then now you hear all these crazy stories about like police officers, judges, district attorneys, all getting paid under the table by prison systems to make sure that they send people their way who aren't necessarily qualified, but hey, you know what? I get my bonus if I'm here, and paying a little bit of marketing to my DA, to my judge, to keep sending people my way, and it's profitable.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you said that, like, you're incentivizing DAs and judges, and it just reminded me of one of the other notes that I came across. Have you heard of a scandal called Kids for Cash?
Sounds dark as fuck. No, I haven't.
Yeah. It's definitely one where it's like, yeah, you read that book cover and it's like, huh, that sounds a little fucked up.
Right.
Yeah, so the deal here, I'm just going to paraphrase, but a few years ago in Pennsylvania, 2 judges were caught accepting like between $1 and $2 million in bribes from a private system, a private prisons company in the area, who were paying the judges to send some of these kids to jail for relatively petty crimes.
So it must have been like a juvenile place.
Yeah. I don't know like the actual ages, but yeah, the title is Kids for Cash, and I think they were targeting like teenagers. So like you think about a high schooler who got caught with marijuana or something like that. And instead of getting charged with community service, which doesn't benefit the prison system because, well, that person's not in the cell, they're not meeting their quotas, all of this stuff, right?
Right.
So the economics of this were so grand that it was better for the private prisons to try to go out, risk getting caught, which they obviously did.
Yeah.
Giving $1 million or $2 million to 2 of the Pennsylvania judges so that they could get their quotas for their inmates.
Wow.
And so that's ultimately the potential outcome. Hopefully that's the worst outcome.
Right.
Maybe it's not. Maybe that's the only one that was revealed and highlighted. The only group that got caught.
Well, yeah. And so if one group got caught, you have to believe there's others who might have been smarter or better about covering their tracks. And again, you look at the economics of it, the way the system is set, we've got capitalism. We've got so many hungry people, hungry to make lots of dollars. And I think that's cool. I'm about it. But when that hunger comes at the expense of people and their lives, that's where I personally raise a flag. Like, hey, hold up, this isn't right.
Yeah, it's to ruin somebody's life over something like that. And so you also have to think about like one of the mothers of one of these kids attended the judge's hearing, and she spoke to the judge during his hearing, and she was distraught because her son had committed suicide as a result of like getting this prison sentence, because he felt like his life was
Over.
ruined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holy
And so
shit.
it's like it's unfair to say that you're killing somebody by putting them in prison, because it's their choice.
Right.
But we've already talked about the stigma that's associated with being a felon. And so if you've been involved in that, you might feel that your life is going to be ruined, and you don't want to live the next 60 years having that brand.
Yeah. Yeah, that's insane, man. Like we talk about on a lot of our episodes, we got to do better. It's interesting because it's easy to look at some of these things and get really depressed or really angry. And I think both of those emotions are valid for some of the space that we're in right now, but it's also easy to get excited, right? Because there's some really hard things that we get to solve for. There's some really complex challenges that we get to come up with fascinating solutions. And I think that's the attitude we have to take with some of this stuff of like, all right, I don't know how we're going to do that. I don't know how we get out of this shithole we're in, but we got ourselves here. So there has to be a way we can get ourselves out.
Agreed. And you can look at the rest of the world and recognize that being on either extreme, the most or the least incarcerated persons per 100,000,
Yeah.
is probably not a good place to be. You probably want to be somewhere in the, maybe it's not the middle, but like somewhere in between.
Right.
And like, obviously it's a good thing if people aren't being incarcerated. You hope that's a result of the crimes not being committed, but
Right.
perhaps it's a result of some insider like trying to keep people out of jail that might deserve to be there. And so that's why I say the extremes are probably not appropriate. And so I think like the thing that troubles me is that we just had our elections, and I don't recall any question about this.
Yeah.
Like, why is this not a topic that's trying to be addressed in a constructive, objective manner? Like, obviously there's a problem.
Yeah.
What can we do about it?
Well, I think it's easy to answer that question why it wasn't asked is because of the economics of it. Is that those who are in charge of it and those who are lining their pockets with a system like this pay the people who can make the change to keep it the same. And we see that with lots of different things, right? We want, or, you know, culture wants things like we mentioned in this episode, like different drugs like marijuana. You see so many states going, no, we're okay with this, and others dragging their feet. We'll get there eventually. The reason why it hasn't hit that federal level yet is because this is something that can be grown in your own backyard, and I don't need to go into a lab to synthesize all of these stuff to go to a doctor to get a pill to fix my pain. This is a threat to all of the money to the pharmaceutical system. Cool. Well, they're going to be paying the people who can change the laws. It's all economics
And conflicts of interest.
Yeah.
So I think, my girlfriend and I were kind of talking about similar conversations last night, not necessarily about privatized prisons, but more about how there's so much corruption or opportunity for corruption, let's say. That's the most fair way to frame it up.
Yeah.
We know that there is corruption, but I don't even want to get into that because you have to go and cite so many different examples. But let's remove the opportunity and maybe view your involvement as a congressman or a congresswoman or a president or a Supreme Court judge in the light of more of a civil service. Like, when you're serving, we expect you to absolve yourself of all of the different personal interests that you may have. Like, this is a civil duty. It's not like you're not compensated well. I mean, obviously you can make more in the private sector.
Right.
The president only gets paid like like 400 something $1,000 a year. Still a lot of money.
Yeah.
So you can live just fine at $400K a year. But obviously, you could be somebody else making millions of dollars a year easily.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say easily, but like the opportunity's there.
Right.
So, like, I think that there should be more of an incentive or more of a mandate from us, the people, to ask or demand from our political leaders that they sell any private interest that they might have.
It's interesting because we're talking about, I think the core thing we're talking about here is morality. And it's hard to, I think humanity over the years has tried to police morality, but you can't, you have to choose it. And so we'll get together as a group of humans and say A is right and B is wrong. And so we try to police morality, but people are going to have their own internal compass. And the only person that can truly change that is that individual. Mm-hmm. And so I think with, let's go to Spider-Man and Uncle Ben. With great power comes great responsibility. And so with a lot of these opportunities and places of power, there's a lot of responsibility to actually serve. And so when I look at leadership, a lot of people look at it and go, oh yeah, I'm in charge of people and I feel powerful. You're like, fuck yeah. But no, you should feel like nervous because you're in charge of people. And now that's on your shoulders. And no, don't let that fill your ego. Let that, gas up your humility.
Let it be a little bit of a burden.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want it to be a difficult job, but by nature, having that responsibility is going to be a burden. And like any executive leader of a company feels that burden. They understand that their decisions impact everybody else. And I've heard it said personally that like that weighs on you.
Yeah.
And everybody treats it differently. Not everybody's as concerned, but I think you'll find that most leaders are concerned about that. And I don't think that it should be any different when you're a political leader.
Right. Well, even going back to these, these systems that are run, these privatized prison systems, you're in charge of all of these people who are whatever version of broken or have broken the rules of society that we've deemed. That's a big responsibility. And it seems like, and I don't know these people. I haven't talked to them. I haven't vibed out what I think their intentions are. But from the actions that I see from afar, it looks like they're just taking those people and writing them off as dollars. And that's like
pretty disgusting.
Yeah. I mean, we agreed as a society, hey, we can't own people anymore. And it seems like we've found new ways to just own people again.
And that's a whole nother conversation about incarceration rates by race.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe that's a good place to end right there. Like,
not that we're unwilling to talk about it. We just don't want to mix topics.
Right. Yeah. And that's, not something that I've researched or looked into a whole lot. I mean, I've done some shallow investigation just out of curiosity because I think it's pretty obvious that there's a problem there as well. That needs to be addressed. But yeah, I think ultimately the realization here is that there should be no incentivization to imprison people and ensure that they are not able to be contributing members of society.
Yeah. Well, I think if I go, all right, I don't own a prison. We see the system and how lobbyists control, regardless of who we vote for, what happens. So it's easy to look at this situation and feel powerless and go, oh man, I don't know what I can do. And so my takeaway from this is to think, all right, how do my actions empower individual humans? Or even on a smaller scale, if someone fucks up, do I write them off? Or do I lean in and go, nope, this person needs a hand? How can let's have a conversation. This might be a little awkward, but you fucked up. But here's how you can do better. And I think if we do that as individuals and then that becomes the norm as society, things will have to change. Thoughts?
I think so too. It's it puts everybody, it makes everybody responsible for the change, because it's got to be a change among society, not a change among law, because we see where this is headed.
Yep.
It feels like there are too many headwinds to overcome, but as a grassroots movement, maybe this is a 5, 10, or longer year change.
Yeah.
But it's been established for 40 years. So let's find a way to make it a different system in 10 years, as opposed to letting this go another 40.
Right. Well, and if I'm an employer, you know what? Let me take this chance on hiring somebody.
And there are, like, you hear about these different companies where they specifically try to hire people with felonies. And maybe that means that they have to spend 4 times as long in an interview process, but mad respect for the business owners or the hiring managers that are making those decisions and trying to correct something that they see flawed.
Yeah. So there's this bread I found. I think it's called Dave's Killer Bread, and it's expensive, but it's tasty. It's got all the healthy, good shit in it that, you know, I'm all about. But then there's the story on the back that talks about how this guy was in prison and for some hard stuff. And then when he got out, he didn't know what to do. So he started working at his brother. I believe it was his brother's, and I could be getting the story wrong, but the essence of it is there, at his brother's bakery. And then that's when he came up with these different ideas to make Dave's Killer Bread. And now it's out in stores fucking everywhere. And it's a neat, fun, like, you know what? It's worth the extra couple dollars to me. One, because it meets the health stuff I'm looking for personally. But 2, I'm investing in the story. Because I think it's valuable to pay somebody who's trying after they've fucked up.
Absolutely. Yeah, we need more of that. And obviously, we all have limited resources. You have to pick and choose what story you want to support. So I think that's beautiful that, like, that's one that resonated with you. I think it's an awesome story, and everybody else can find a story that resonates with them that they can support with whatever extra resources you might have. If you do, if you don't, that's okay. Like, everybody's in a different situation.
Right. And let's be real, I might have just gotten conned on a really nice marketing ploy, but hey, my intention is right, to me at least, and I'm doing my best to try to make the world a better place.
I love it. I want more better world.
Awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in this week, everybody. Let us know your thoughts. Hit us up on social media. Tell your friends. Tell us we're great, terrible, whatever you want to tell us, and let us know what you want to hear next. We've got a couple more cool ones.
Peace out.